as Glenn said, we met maybe about three and a half weeks ago at an event over in San Jacinto, and we had a really good conversation. And he got one of the books, and then he called me a little while after that. And we've had some other really fine conversations after that. And I'm so excited to hear the things that you're talking about doing. And right now, I thought about some things I wanted to say this morning. I know I don't have a whole lot of time, but I've heard so many things that you are planning on doing that are really exciting. And I'm looking forward, I hope to continue this relationship and to work with you because you're doing so many things. We have a little radio show that's on, it'll be on tonight. It's called Revolution Radio. And it's on an internet. But we have also been working on developing. We have a guy that sounds like he might be able to fill in some of the gaps you have in terms of technology, in terms of website, not only audio, radio production, but video productions. We're working on our website, aeaforusa.com, and we're going to have ongoing video input into that. Almost a regular programming. So hopefully we'll be able to get some of you involved in that, maybe on a very regular basis to be a part of that. We have all kinds of ideas for that. So I'm excited to hear some of the things you're talking about. You talked about Social Security and the seniors and things like that. In this book is a solution to our payroll and compensation plan. And among other things, I can tell you what it is in 12 words. Obama may need over 2,000 pages to describe his health care plan, and then tens of thousands more pages of regulation in order to try to make that all happen. But you know what? That's what you need if you're a crook. That's what you need if you're trying to pull something over on somebody. If you're honest, if you're straightforward, usually a few words will do. I can tell you in 12 words a way to solve our payroll and compensation problems in this country that'll do a number of things. Included among them, it'll increase take-home pay by upwards of 40% on average without costing employers or taxpayers or anybody else a penny. It would return control of his life and his income to the American worker. It would reduce the complexity of payroll and all the record keeping you have to do for thousands and thousands of businesses. It would save our pensions. But one of the things in there is a plan to rescue, let me make a point here, not Social Security. Everybody's asking the wrong question about that. They say, how do we save Social Security? You can't. It's dead. It's a dead horse. It's been a dead horse since 1935 when FDR put his signature to that piece of paper. And if you know what happens when you bet on a dead horse, you don't win. The question is not how do we save Social Security, the question is how do we save our seniors. As long as you're tied to Social Security is a concrete life vest, you're going down. But in this very simple 12 words, and you start to look into what that would mean, we can take better care of our seniors, fulfill the promises that have made to them in a much better way than the government can, and it would not cost the taxpayers a penny. It wouldn't cost you any additional benefits. You wouldn't lose any benefits, and just so forth. There is such power available to us in this country. There are so many things that we can do. We just have to stop thinking and acting inside of the boxes that were made for us by the box makers to keep us under control. And that's the problem. And Glenn and I were just talking about this a little bit this morning before the meeting. We tend to think, well, here's how we solve things. Why? Because that's the way we've always solved things. Well, are things getting any better? No. Then maybe we need to look for a different path. Because as long as we oblige the box makers and keep thinking and acting inside of those boxes they have created for us, they win, we lose. And that's what AR2 is all about. And Glenn, in one of the conversations we had over the phone from the time that we had that meeting and he read the book, he said something really interesting. He said a lot of things that were interesting, but one of them really hit me. He says, I want to start a wildfire across this nation. To sweep across this nation, to start doing the things that need to be done. And I don't want to speak for him, but I kind of think the reason why he called me and wanted me to come here and talk briefly about this is because after reading AR2, I think he has a sneaking suspicion I've got a few matches in my pocket. Oh, do I? Actually, it's more like a thermonuclear device when you start looking at what this can accomplish. Now, it is important that we break out of these molds. See, my view of the whole thing, if I were to summarize it very, very quickly, kind of what's become my mantra over the last few years is this. And let me elaborate a little bit because I suspect, after hearing all this support for certain individuals in a certain party, you might not like one of the things I'm going to say here, but let me take a minute to explain. To me, it seems that the government is corrupt. The political system is dysfunctional. Both political parties have not only failed us, they have betrayed us.
Yes.
We cannot trust them with our futures. We, the people, must take back control ourselves. Now, I've worked for one of those parties for over 4 decades. I was president of the Teenage Republicans at Pacific High School in San Bernardino back in the 60s. I've been working for Republican candidates ever since then. But you know, it started to dawn on me several years ago, they don't have the answer anymore. I've been interested in history and politics for over 4 decades. I've been paying attention for over 4 decades. And one of the things that I have seen is that if you listen to a conservative Republican of today, it sounds an awful lot like a liberal Democrat of the 1960s. And that's exactly when things started to go south, right? Well, more of the same is only going to get us more of the same. We need to do something different. And the remarkable thing is, in the middle of this book, there's 3 sections. The 3rd section is on 8 elements of the revolution. 8 separate areas, 8 different things that we can address with very simple solutions, very simple ways to change things. Like I said, 12 words to change payroll and compensation. 4-part plan to reduce our taxes and keep them reduced. A 2-part plan for budgetary and bureaucratic reform, and just on and on and on. But having to do with the political system here, the thing is, I truly believe that most people in this country are fed up to here with the party machines. And if you've noticed, no matter which way an election goes, no matter who wins, the party machines, the machinists win, we lose. They get the power, the perks, the privileges, the pensions, the payroll. We get the headaches and the bills. Now what's going on there? Is there a little collusion? Have they perhaps created a system that benefits them no matter what happens? And we end up paying no matter what happens? I mean, think about it. A number of years ago, we had a young senator from Illinois who was complaining about the huge deficits that the president at that time, Bush, was running up. He said they were irresponsible, even unpatriotic. But the Republicans are all saying, oh, you know, well, under the circumstances, it's okay. Even though some people of you here said, I don't know what the Republicans stand for anymore. You're right. The Republicans used to stand against that kind of wasteful spending. But during the Bush administration, well, it's okay, because it's our expenditures, it's our plan. And this young senator from Illinois was saying it was irresponsible and unpatriotic. Well, gee, then that young senator became president. And he ran up even bigger deficits than Bush did. And now it's okay. The parties do this. There is no right and wrong anymore. It's what works for our party, for our group. And we've got to stop that. We've got to break out of that mold. And one of the first chapter in part 2 is called Time to Crash the Party, No Party Affiliation. George Washington warned against the dangers of a party system. And he said, you know, man, stay away from this. And if we had listened to him, we wouldn't have these troubles now. We need to evaluate candidates and what they offer in terms of the principles. Not in terms of whether there's an E, an R in parentheses or a D in parentheses after the name. That doesn't tell us anything anymore. I listened, the current chairman of this California Republican committee is Jim Brulte. I listened to him. I was in the room listening to him at a San Bernardino County Central Committee meeting back in the early part of 2013 when he was running for that office. Did he say a single word about good old-fashioned patriot Republican values? Not one. His basic message boiled down to this. We need more votes. We need more money. The other side's doing a better job than we are. We need to become more like them.
Wow.
And he got elected. And he's running the show now in California. Well, there's a lot of things we need to do, and we need to do them differently. And that's what this book is all about. It's a bust out the walls kind of a book. Let's look at things differently. It will show you how to fight and win the Second American Revolution in less time than it took to win the first. without taking over the White House, the Congress, the Supreme Court, or any constitutional amendments. It will show the two offices upon which we must focus like a laser. Because if we take over those offices, and anywhere we take over those offices, and when you combine it with one of the other elements of the revolution, which I call linkage, and that's the idea that this will give us the power to reestablish the Constitution according to its original intent. It'll show us how we can do that. See, there's such a muddle of ideas out there right now that we don't know how to fix things. And that's the problem with the Patriot community right now. I think the Patriot community knows in general exactly what needs to be done. We need to restore all those good old-fashioned Patriot values that made this country great in the first place. Beyond that, I'm afraid we don't have a clue. We don't know specifically how to do that. And we don't have a plan for accomplishing it. Well, this book offers that plan. It offers the specifics that can tell us how to do that. And one of the things we must do is we must restore the original intent of the Constitution. Now, how do we do that when we have people say, well, this passage really means this, and this passage really means that? Through something in this book called linkage, it explains a way to understand, read, interpret, and apply the Constitution consistently and to keep it that way. And by doing that, we would have the power. And I know this sounds kind of far-fetched, but I just have a few minutes here today, and I don't want to abuse that. I probably already have, but... well, thank you. The linkage is the idea that the Constitution was written to implement and institutionalize the philosophy of government that's embedded in the Declaration. Very few people realize there is a philosophy of government in the Declaration. And that's kind of strange because it's hiding in plain sight. Most of it is found in the most memorized portion of the Declaration, although most people in their memory work about 10 words too soon. Do you remember it? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then come the next 10 words that reveal this to be a philosophy and not just a collection of platitudes. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Now read those passages in reverse order, and you'll see it very clearly. Governments are instituted among men to secure these rights that are endowed by their Creator. Short form, the rightful role of government is to do the work of God. And I want to applaud you, starting with a prayer. I think the Tea Party is one of the more constructive things that have happened in this country in a long time, but I do think they've made some mistakes. And that's crippled them a bit. And one of them is, at least at the leadership level, they don't like to talk about what they call moral issues. As Glenn has pointed out, we're in the mess we're in because we've had a moral decay in this country. And the founders would have seen it like that. They understood that clearly. So, governments exist to do the work of God. What specific work to secure these rights? What rights? Life, property, liberty. Those were the holy trinity of rights to the founders. That's what government is supposed to do. To secure them, which means establish and protect them. Not to abuse them, not to take them away, but to secure them. Now, when we understand that the Constitution was written to accomplish this philosophy of government, then we must link the two documents together, and that's why I call this linkage. When you do that, and only when you do that, will you have the power to consistently and accurately understand the Constitution. In effect, the Declaration provides the lenses through which we must read the Constitution. If you take your glasses off, things get fuzzy. You start making mistakes. Now, what does this mean? Again, if I have a chance to come back some evening and talk in more detail, I can show you. But you know what we can do? If we take linkage and combine it with a governor or a sheriff who takes his oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution seriously, you know what we can do? In hours, within hours of them beginning their office, we can end abortion in that area. We can end same-sex marriage in that area. We can restore all of your Second Amendment rights in that area. We can stop the diversion of your money, which is a confiscation of your wealth, to pay all of these EBT cards and everything else, we can stop it in that territory. And we can literally start to change the political energy in the nation so that we make this reform, this revolution, almost inevitable. Now I'm just giving you a thimbleful of shavings from the tip of the iceberg here. Enough to just maybe tease you a little bit into maybe hoping I'll come back and have me explain a little bit more, or hopefully work with you. I'd love to work with you what you're trying to accomplish. It sounds like you've got some great leadership and some great ideas, and you're heading in a wonderful direction. And I'd love to be a part of that. And that's a big part of what we're doing too. So we've got a whole lot more to say, and I'd love to work with you, but again, I don't want to abuse the time, so I'll pass the microphone back. If you have any questions or anything, I'd be happy to answer them. I'll stay afterwards or whatever. But thank you for allowing me to come here and let's take this country back.
Okay. I really appreciate you coming out with the message. There is something I want to read in your book. And you didn't mention this particular paragraph. Charles Finney. I went to my World Book at home, and I looked him up, and it just had a short paragraph about Charles Finney, but he was in the book. He was a young attorney, and he became a minister, and he became part of the Great Awakening. He toured England several times, and he lived a long life, and he was part of a revival that took place, like it says in the book here, in the 18th century. So he was a real individual. He was the head of a major university for a long period of time. And I was in a conversation with a young fella down where me and Tom go to the gym. His father's a pastor. And I read this to him, and he totally did not like it. He totally rejected what had this thing out of the book. And he said, my father's a pastor today. And he disagrees, and he went and called him and talked to him about it. And he come back and he said, oh, this Charles Finney's he's a heretic. We had a real negative view. So I went to my World Book, looked it up, and it didn't say that at all. He was part of a great awakening in the country during that period of time. But there's a lot of people that criticize him, and there's a reason they criticize him. And it's this little paragraph, a quote from him. I'll read it to you, and you'll know why that there's people out there today going on the internet saying he's a heretic and he's all these nasty things. Charles Finney was one of the luminaries of the Second Great Awakening in America during the late 18th century and the early 19th century. With amazing insightfulness, he once remarked, if there is decay of conscience, the pulpit is responsible for it. If the public press lacks moral discernment, the pulpit is responsible for it. If the church is degenerate and worldly, the pulpit is responsible for it. If the world loses its interest in Christianity, the pulpit is responsible for it. If Satan rules in our halls of the legislature, the pulpit is responsible for it. If our politics become so corrupt that the very foundation of our government are ready to fall away, the pulpit is responsible for it, end quote. And a year ago, that was my thought. The real culprit is right here. I'm a Christian and I go to the Baptist church. And it doesn't matter what church you go to as far as I'm concerned, as long as you're a Christian and you're trying to do what's right. But even more responsible for what's going on than me is my teacher that's standing up there, teaching and trying to show me and teach me the commandments, God's word, and what's right and what's wrong. And you can see our country is corrupt, and it's happened. Here's a guy that was an attorney. He was pastor, dedicated his life, traveled all through Europe and England, preaching whatever he was preaching. I don't know. I haven't read any of his books. But I know one thing. He hit the nail on the head as far as I'm concerned. That's my opinion. But let me tell you, when you try to point the finger at yourself, you can't fight back against yourself because you're pointing to yourself. But when you point point to your leader and say, everything's burning in a disaster, they come back and they reject that. At least that's been my experience. When we got a CD about education, Christian education, homeschooling, public schools, I went to my pastor. They built a $5 million church. They have tremendous facilities, much greater than that little drop-down screen we put in. And I said, I would like you to see this and show it to our membership. Let's start educating the public what's going on and how they're teaching homosexuality and all this stuff in our schools. Is a normal, great way of life, then that's to be acceptable. I couldn't even get our pastor to watch that. When he rejected it and everything else, I said, will you do me one favor? Just will you take this home and you and your wife watch it? He said, okay, if I get a chance, I'll watch it. A couple weeks later, he handed it back to me and said, I just don't have time for this.
Wow.
And that was the one request I made. So now they argue, well, we know all this. And I don't buy that. Because if they knew it, they sincerely knew in their heart that young little girls were going to school, and boys, and they were teaching them what their religion, Baptists, Catholics, Mormons, all the great churches and institutions in this country are adamantly opposed to and call an abomination. They're preaching and teaching that to your children, and they say they know that, and then I say, they're on the wrong side. They're not, there's something wrong. We've been infiltrated by the bad guys. But I think they're just overwhelmed with what they're trying to do to keep their own little institution going. And there's problems. And that's what I'm trying to insightful myself to figure out why. So I got excited when I read this because I sincerely believe. No, I don't believe it. I feel like I know that that's the problem. And that's why I got off the couch a year ago. And my first thought was, the good guys need to get on board with me. We gotta do something. I'm gonna go talk to them. Carol, will you go ahead and make a list of every church so I can start going around and talking to the pastors? Every religion. And then I got kind of overwhelmed with getting a group going, and I kind of fell off the wagon, and I hadn't really been following up. But this got me turned on. It got me excited. And we need to start finger pointing and speak it out and quoting people like this. And the fact is, isn't it real that the country is getting corrupt? Isn't it true that Christianity now is, it's been mocked and put down? The president come out and said, this is no longer a Christian nation. It isn't. It's always been somewhat of a secular nation where the Christianity is up to the people. The government doesn't do it. It's the people are supposed to be running the government. But it's all the negative things have happened, even the press. We got a few stations like Fox News and everything that we kind of watch. We think they're a little more conservative. But overall, the press and the media is dominated by the progressive left. With all the stimulus monies and favors, they've been buying up book companies all over the United States, way above market value. They've been buying up newspapers, little periodicals, and dominating the media by controlling everything. That's why we need some kind of a means of communication. The biggest advantage we have, and I believe this, I think we're right in the principles we stand for, and they're wrong. Theirs are based on a lust for power and money and dominance over the people, a small group to control the masses, whereas our group are for liberty and freedom and the original principles in the Constitution. That gives us a big advantage if we can educate ourselves to that and actually utilize it. So I'm excited about AR2, and I would like to become a part of that, affiliate with it, get a membership in it, whatever format they have, and then maybe adopt some of their ideas and so forth. Jan, will you come up front? You have something to say there?
I had a question for Lawrence, and it really, Lawrence, it touches on the issue that he talked about, but it also relates to your book. The mayor of Houston, who is a lesbian, has asked for the sermons of all of the pastors in Houston. And there's been a tremendous pushback on that. And it is horrific, but this is the beginning, I think, of that. Am I right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, well, actually, I think it's a continuation.
Is it?
We've seen this happening. The lesbian mayor of Houston has basically set her sights against a lot of the Christian community and the leaders of the Christian community, especially if they should dare to actually talk about what is mentioned so many times in the Bible. In fact, it's pretty clear whether you worship Jehovah or Allah, and I wouldn't recommend the latter. And if you read the Old Testament, New Testament, or the Koran, and I wouldn't recommend the latter, but it's quite consistent. God does not like homosexual behavior. He calls it an abomination. He finds it detestable. It is abhorrent. Now, find anywhere in Scripture words stronger than that to condemn anything. I think this has God's attention, and I think He's not too happy about it.
Yeah.
Now, again, I think as you're saying, there is something much bigger going on here. Jesus said, and war broke out in heaven. There is an ongoing war, and we're a part of it. And if you look, this is interesting too. I want to recommend another book. Maybe some of you are familiar with Cleon Skousen, wrote The 5,000-Year Leap. That's been pretty popular in conservative and patriot circles for a number of years now. He had another one that's not as well known. It was written back in 1958. He used to be an FBI agent for over 16 years. And one of his assignments was to study the communists and what they were doing. And he wrote a book called The Naked Communist. I've read a lot about communism. I can show you a couple of full bookshelves at home. That was one of my first interests, not in a positive way. But see, back in the 60s, all the New Left movement was starting and all this other stuff, and I just saw initially, right away, this is not right. You know, this stuff is wrong, this is nonsense, and know your enemy. So I started reading. If I had to recommend one book on communism, that'd be the one I would recommend. It talks about the history of it, it talks about the origins, the originators of it, their personalities, and the course of action they've taken in all this. Well, near the end of the book, he lists 45 specific objectives of the Communist Party. And you might say, well, communism, the Soviet Union, is all good. No, it's not. It's just reincarnated under a different form. But in that list of 45 things, these are objectives that they came up with in order to destroy the United States.
Yep.
Now, if you want to know what you should do the opposite of what they said, you know. And I'm going to be doing a series on this starting up pretty soon on Our Own Revolution Radio. Talk about, let's look at what our enemies have said to do to take down America. There's a quote from somebody, but when you hear it, when you hear the first line of it, you're going to think, well, this is somebody who understands America and is probably an admirer of it. He said that the United States is like a healthy body, and its resistance, meaning its resistance to disease and decline and death, is based on its patriotism, its spirituality, and its morality. Then the next sentence says, if we can undermine these three things, America will collapse from within. Joseph Stalin.
Succeeding.
Our enemies know very clearly how to take us down. They know a lot better than our friends do. And if you read through those 45 objectives, some of them are a little bit more passé right now, like gaining entrance to the patent department, so the Soviets can learn of all of our industrial secrets and things like that. But you go through there, so many of them talk about infiltrating the schools, taking over the teachers' unions, infiltrating the media, colleges, the church. Undermine this notion about, describe scriptural, revealed religion as a crutch that only the weak need. Go to a social religion where we talk about, well, let's liberate, the so-called liberation philosophy and things like this. It just goes on and on and on, and among it says, things specifically designed to undermine our morals, promote homosexuality and other deviant behavior as normal, natural. It just goes on and on and on and on. In 1831, a Frenchman named Alexis de Tocqueville came over here with a buddy of his. They had heard all this stuff about America. I said, wow, something amazing is going on over there. Let's go see what's happening. And he wrote a 2-volume book called Democracy in America. That wasn't its original title, but that's what it's come to be known as. And in that, he talks about the spiritual strength of America. He says, one of the first things that smacks you upside the head when you set foot off that boat and on American soil is the spirituality of the people. He says, this is completely different from France and Europe. He says, there, the church is usually the enemy of liberty. Here, liberty and their faith go hand in hand. It was an amazing thing. And then there's another remark, it's not in Democracy in America, but it's often attributed to him, and we don't really know if he said it or not, but he easily could have. He says, America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. And this gets exactly to your point, the undermining of our foundation. We stand on a moral foundation. Everything we believe in as patriots and conservatives is based on morality. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't see that. We talk about kind of the twin pillars of conservatism. We talk about preserving individual liberties and the benefits of limited government. And I used to talk about that a lot when my other book, Solutions, came out, because there's a chapter and a whole section that deals on rebuilding a moral America. And when I'd go around and talk to different groups, I would take a two-legged stool. Okay, here's your stool, conservative America. You've got individual liberty, limited government. What happens to it? Falls down. A stool needs at least 3 legs in order to be stable, and so does our system of government. And the missing leg is morality.
Wow.
And some people don't understand that, but I made the point. I said, think about it. Think about this. Without a moral America, none of this other stuff is going to work. You know, we think, oh, we're trying to do our rest of the world, you know, take freedom and liberty and impose it in other areas of the world. It won't work. They're not ready for it yet. And I said, I can prove this in the answer to 2 simple questions. Question number 1, what do you think would happen if you gave a great deal of individual liberty, one of our pillars, to an immoral people? And all God's children said, duh. Right? They will do immoral stuff. And the society, the nation will quickly degenerate into what I call a penitentiary society. A nation populated by criminals, but without the benefit of the bars and guards to restrain them. And I think we all know we wouldn't want to live in a place such as that. Second question, what do you think would happen if we set up a limited government to rule over such an immoral people? Again, the answer is obvious. We will have chaos, havoc, anarchy, and eventually despotism. Because the people will not long tolerate the profound degree of insecurity that would characterize such a society. They'll quickly sell out to the first strong man who promises them safety. It's a recurrent theme in history. If you love liberty, then you must preach morality. And that's something that a lot of the leaders of the Tea Party movement have failed. They don't want to talk about. I can give you remarks from Jenny Beth Martin and Mark Meckler that testified to that. We don't want to deal with the moral issues. We just want to lower your taxes and protect the Constitution. Well, how do you think you're going to protect the Constitution when the Constitution was founded upon a moral basis if you don't protect that moral basis? So, yes, in terms of this and what you're talking about, this assault on America is first and foremost an assault on our morals, because if they know that if they can undermine that, everything else is just going to collapse, and that's what's been happening.
Okay, one more important thing. I would like everybody here to buy a copy of this book. What's the price of this?
Technically it's 16, but if anybody wants it, I'll give it for 12. Tax included.
Okay, I'd like everybody here to buy one of these books before you leave. Take it home, read it, study it. And if you can't afford it, go ahead and get a copy and I'll pay for it. I'd like everybody to have this because I think his message is clear, and I've even had people in this room sitting here tell me, Glenn, there's certain areas you really shouldn't go in because you're going to have divisiveness and so forth. And we're not all going to agree 100% on some things in this world. But we have to face reality. If we refuse to face reality in the real world and the real issues, and then we're going to be walking blind and we're going to fall in a hole somewhere. It's just not going to work. So please buy a copy of this, $12, and that's with a discount. And if you can't afford one, come and get one and I'll pay for it. It'd be a gift from me to you, because I really think it's something that will enrich each one of you. And the part that's really interesting to me, I know that I had a creator that made me, my father, and his father before him. And how far back that goes, how far is infinity or eternity, I don't know. But I do know that I had a creator that made me, and I have the right to defend myself to stay alive. And that right needs to be enhanced wherever possible. And this made it very clear to me, the obligation of my government is to protect my God-given rights. And of course, I have to try to figure out what that creator is. And let me tell you, some of the greatest men, Darwin tried to figure that out, and he couldn't figure it out, how God did all this. So there is nobody that's a genius enough to understand everything there is to know. We're very limited, and we're limited on time also. So we need to use our time, become patriots and activists to increase our value tremendously, as high as possible, to counterbalance all the money and evil that's being thrown against us. So with that, I think that's our meeting. I want to thank our guest speaker.
Yes.
I think it was a great, one of our best speakers we've had so far.